My oldest son, who was about 7 at the time, the next morning he came out of his bedroom and he was like, "Were you playing your new saxophone last night, Daddy?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I thought so. It sounded like you were moving chairs in the kitchen."
Oh my God.
And so, you kind of need that reminder that just because you're good at some stuff,
Right.
you can still play an instrument like you're moving chairs in the kitchen for a while.
Welcome to an episode of the Golden Sheep Podcast. Who are you?
Who am I?
Who are you? Yes.
Art Markman. Good to meet you.
Okay.
I am a cognitive psychologist. I've been at the University of Texas for 26 years, and I also am in administration now. So I serve as our vice provost for academic affairs.
Wow, a mouthful. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence today, Dr. Markman. We're excited and we're curious. You wear many, many hats. Many, many hats. Could you walk us through all of those one by one? I know you listed some, but walk us through each.
Every hat. Okay. So professionally, I am a psychologist. Not a clinical psychologist, so I don't really talk to people about their problems. I focus on studying the way people think, trying to understand reasoning and decision making and motivation.
Okay.
I am also a university administrator, so I try to help the university to function a little more effectively by improving the way that we teach our undergraduates, our graduate students, as well as our continuing and professional education students. I try to bring a lot of my own field outward as much as possible, and so I write regularly for Fast Company and for Psychology Today. I have a weekly radio show and podcast on KUT called Two Guys on Your Head, and just try to do work that way. I have over the years done a lot of work for companies that want to bring more cognitive science into the work that they do, and so I think professionally those are a bunch of the hats that I've got, and then personally, try to get out there and enjoy life and get some exercise in and have a good time.
Yeah, and you also play the saxophone.
I do play the saxophone, that is correct, yes. Yeah.
Random fact, everybody.
Right, exactly.
So, when you were 5 years old, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I didn't think about it too much. I mean, I was surrounded by, my mom was a teacher, my dad was an accountant. I think I was surrounded by accountants and lawyers and doctors and just professionals. Mm-hmm. And so I think growing up, I just assumed that that's what you grew up to be. You went to college, and I was lucky enough to have two parents who had master's degrees. My dad had an MBA, my mom had a master's in education. So it was I knew from early on that I'd go to college, and then I assumed you went to college in order to become a professional of some kind. And it was only when I went to college that I began to realize I had more opportunities than that to choose what I wanted to do. And I actually got to the middle of my sophomore year in college still pretty confused about what I wanted to do.
Sophomore year in college.
Sophomore year in college, yeah. So I went to college thinking I might study economics or physics.
Oh.
And I took an economics class and I didn't really like it that much. And I took a physics class and it decidedly didn't like me. And and so I had to find something to do. And so, in the end, I went to an advisor because it was time. I had to declare a major finally. And I said, well, I'm not really sure what I want to major in. And my advisor said, so what do you like? I said, well, I took a couple of psychology classes, but I don't think I really want to be a psychologist. And I took a couple of computer science classes, but I don't think I really want to be a computer scientist. And I took a neuroscience class, and that was cool, but I don't really want to be a neuroscientist. Took a philosophy class, that was neat, but I don't really want to be a philosopher. Took a linguistics class, I thought that was pretty cool. Don't really want to be a linguist, so I'm kind of stuck. And the advisor looked down at that whole list and said, you realize that every single one of these classes counts towards our major in cognitive science. Is it possible that you're a cognitive scientist? I was like, maybe. So I ended up declaring a major in cognitive science and continuing to do that work and realizing that, that was what I wanted to do.
Wow. All of those classes.
Yeah, every single one of them was part of that major because, cognitive science is this interdisciplinary study of the mind.
Wow.
And so there's, psychology does experiments to look at it, neuroscience looks at the brain, linguistics looks at the structure of language and how language interfaces with the way that people think. Computer science, because, back then it was the early days of artificial intelligence. So all of these different approaches were ways of thinking about the way that minds work. And the idea was that that the brain, the mind is too difficult to understand if you take only one single approach to it. So you have to really kind of triangulate on what it's doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think at this moment, it's the perfect time to ask you the question of, in one sentence, how did you get here?
In one sentence, I've said often my father taught me at a very young age that it's better to be lucky than good.
Wow.
And I think that's really how I got here. It's we all work hard, and we all prepare for the future, but it requires sometimes just being in the right place at the right time. I mean, I know that and admission to graduate school was really competitive, and
Yes.
and yet I managed to get into a good program, and I certainly worked hard, but so did lots of other people who applied. So it's there was a certain amount of luck that went into that. One place where that's really obvious is when you go through graduate school in PhD programs and you aspire to be an academic, so you'd love to be a faculty member somewhere. I think one of the things that you don't realize, particularly when you're a grad student early on, is how few jobs there are. So in my field of cognitive psychology, I went on the job market in 1993,
Okay.
and there were about 30 jobs nationally for cognitive psychologists.
30 jobs.
30 jobs
in the USA.
In the USA, and that was every kind of university, all the way from schools like the University of Texas, which was hiring at the time, and places like Columbia University, as well as much smaller schools, and so that was it. That was the sum total of academic jobs, and and the thing about being in an academic job is if you manage to land a job in one of the top tier universities, it has a profound positive effect on your career.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
if you don't, then you're just as good as you were had you gotten one of the great jobs. Only now you don't get the same opportunities. You don't have the same chances to get grants or the same. Your even the papers you submit don't quite get the same level of respect, and you don't have the same resources available to you to do research and the same resources available for teaching. So I was really about a week away from getting a job at a lower tier university. Would have been an excellent job. I mean, I was lucky enough that I had an offer for an academic job.
Right.
But at the very last moment, had the chance actually to interview at Columbia University and got the job there. About a week before I had to make a decision about taking the job at this other university, and that changed the arc of my career substantially.
100%. Yes.
And it could have gone otherwise. I mean, it's sort of moments like that. It's very clear that it didn't have to be the way it turned out. It could have gone very differently. And so I think you have to recognize how much luck there is in any success story. When you look back on what you've done, yes, you work hard, but things have to break your way.
Right. How does one go about looking for luck or having luck find them?
Well, I do think you have to be prepared for it. I think you have to do the work and lay the groundwork, and then hope.
Right.
And don't give up when you have an initial run of bad luck. I think you have to continue trying things. Doesn't necessarily mean trying the same thing over and over again. Sometimes it can mean shifting
Right.
and trying to figure out where the next bit of luck might be.
Yeah.
But not giving up and just saying, well, you know what, nothing's ever going to work out for me. I think you have to do that. You have to be prepared for it, and you have to be willing to take some chances when a potential lucky situation arises. That is, it's, you know, when great moments happen to you in your life, you often don't know it at the time.
Nope.
It's when you look back on it, you realize, oh, I'm really glad that happened. And so being willing to just pursue something without knowing quite where it's going to go
Right.
is important, rather than I mean, another thing I say a lot is you shouldn't edit your life in the forward direction, right? So and what I mean by that is you shouldn't decide what your life is going to look like and then cut out anything that doesn't look like what you imagined.
Right.
You know, I think it's better to let the opportunities come to you and then tell the story later.
Right.
And so, you know, because if you decide in advance, you know, success for me means this very narrow thing, then you may not be open to all of the other pathways that might allow you to be really successful,
Right.
because you've got your heart, your mind fixed on a particular thing. So,
Right.
so if what you do instead is allow yourself to be open to, oh, I'd never considered doing something like this before, but it seems interesting, let me try it.
Right.
Then when you try it, if it succeeds, later you look back and you say, boy, I'm really glad I did that.
Right. And life, as we talked about before, life makes so much more sense in retrospect.
That's right. That's right.
And for somebody who has not had enough evidence of that yet, and even, I mean, I could tell you that, and I do believe in that. This uncertainty of life is scary.
Yeah.
Courage is not in the absence of fear.
Yeah.
What can you tell us as far as a concrete first step in how to navigate the wildlife changes?
Well, I think that one of the things that's important to for everyone to keep in mind is that when you look at somebody who is successful in their lives, they had the same experience at that point in their lives and at that point in their careers. There's nothing certain early on. And so, you know, I mean, look, when, you know, one of the things that we know from research is that when people look back on high school, they think about it blissfully, right? What a wonderful time that was. Despite the fact that when you're in high school, there's tremendous amounts of angst. I mean, you couldn't pay me enough to go back to high school.
No.
But the reason that people feel so warmly about it is because they know how it came out. You know, when you're in your 20s and your 30s and you look back on it, you know, all of that angst fades away a little bit because, in fact, you did get into a college. You did have relationships. You did get a job. You did have wonderful things that happened to you. So all of those kinds of things that you were worried about at the age of 16, 17, 18 were not things that you have to worry about when you're 25 or 30. And so what you have to realize is if you're 25 or 30 and you're looking forward in your career, there's the same level of uncertainty. And so you have angst about different things. But if you recognize that when you're 40 or 50 and you look back on it, you will look back on those years with the same kind of rose-colored glasses because you will know how the story came out.
Right. Right? It just makes so much more sense once
That's
you've
right.
gone through it looking back.
That's right.
So how does a cognitive scientist, academic, professor at one of the top universities in the country end up at UT Austin being the provost?
Well, so I'm to be clear, I'm in the provost's office. I'm
Yes.
a vice provost.
Yes.
But you know,
But
it's
in the provost's office.
in the
even.
provost. No,
Yeah.
and it's been great. It's a path I would not have predicted. I think I started my career expecting that I would be a pretty typical faculty member doing my research, getting my grants, writing papers that get read by 30 of my closest colleagues, teaching my classes and things like that.
Yeah.
But it was a slow evolution of things over time. I mean, one of the formative moments was that I got really angry at the television one night. The Congress had just threatened to cut funding for the Social Behavioral and Economic Sciences Directorate at the National Science Foundation, and I was literally yelling at the television saying, don't people understand how important this research is? Why don't people understand? And I decided to pretend it was literally my fault that they didn't understand. And ask myself, what would I do differently if I was actually responsible for people not understanding why this research is important? And that led me to do more communication outward, not just to my fellow scientists, but to everybody else about cognitive psychology and cognitive science. And so, I mean, back in 2009, I started blogging for Psychology Today when nobody knew what a blog was.
And Psychology Today is a huge thing now.
Yeah,
Everybody knows
yeah,
it.
and their blog site was really tiny at the time. And so I really started doing a lot more of that kind of work. I ended up on the scientific advisory board of the Dr. Phil show.
That is so cool, Dr. Phil.
And that opened up other opportunities. I gave talks. Some of those talks ended up being for people in business. That led to an opportunity to do some consulting for Procter & Gamble, which I ended up doing over about a 6 or 7 year period.
Right.
When you're a faculty member, you're encouraged to do that kind of outside work, but you declare it to the university. And because I declared it to the university, the dean of the College of Liberal Arts knew what I was doing, and so they were trying to start some kind of master's program that would be available to people in business, but bring liberal arts principles to it. And I got an email saying, we'd like to do this, we're not quite sure how to do it, maybe you could help us.
Wow.
And I ended up stepping into that, and it became the Human Dimensions of Organizations program, which is an executive master's program for people that is rooted in the liberal arts, but helps people in business, government, nonprofits, and the military to learn about people. And then we added to that open enrollment classes. We actually backfilled that whole thing with an undergraduate major. There's about 525 undergraduates wandering around the UT campus saying that they're HDO majors. So it's a thing, I guess. Yeah. And so that was, so that was a bit of administrative work. And then, I really felt like in those kinds of roles, I'm good at fixing things that are broken, building things that don't exist, not so good at running things that are already things.
Right.
And so after really getting the HDO program started and working there for about 8 years, it was time for me to turn that over to the next person. So my associate director, Amy Ware, we trained her up. She became the director of the program, and then I had an opportunity to work at a think tank on the UT campus called IC Squared, which was an economic development think tank, and was having a wonderful time doing that when COVID hit.
Oh.
And I got pulled into helping the university to do COVID planning. So I served as our lead for academic planning during the COVID crisis. And so, for about 6 months, it was all day, every day thinking about COVID.
Right. Absolutely.
And when you hang around members of the administration long enough and you get some things done, they find other things for you to do. And in the middle of that process, in about August or November of 2020, they approached me to say that they were looking to create an office that would coordinate a lot of our education activities, particularly continuing and professional education, and would I be willing to get involved in that? And sounded like fun, and so I stepped into that role to figure out what needed to be done, and that became this portfolio of academic affairs in the Provost office. So it was a long journey.
Right.
From just being a faculty member, teaching my classes and writing my papers to ending up in the Provost office. But it's been great fun. Although jokingly, I think faculty members always treat the administration with a little bit of skepticism. So I bought a clock with a picture of the Death Star on it when I took my first full-time administrative role, just to remind myself that I'd gone over to the dark side. And periodically, I do find that if I say something that sounds particularly administratorly, I mean, it usually involves talking about the budget and other kinds of things like that. If I use the word budget and legislature in the same sentence, in my head, I hear Darth Vader.
Vader, the dark side.
Yeah, exactly.
The red laser coming
That's
out.
right, exactly.
So the one word that pops into my mind when I hear you talk about your journey, from the moment where you were a young man picking your major, you weren't even sure about what that was openness to opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Right? Like
that's
you were just open to learning, open to trying things. And it wasn't like you set out to be in the provost office at
That's
UT
right.
Austin. You wanted to be an academic. And even before that, you didn't even know what you wanted to do.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think that's a really great capsule for young individuals listening in, or even people who want to shift their career when they're
Yeah.
even older, is that the openness will land you where luck will find you.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, the world is changing rapidly, right? I mean,
Exactly.
the fact is, if you tried to plan things out, you would fail because you wouldn't foresee all of the changes in the world that are coming.
Yeah.
So you have to be willing to be open to what opportunities are there, and to be willing to adapt to the circumstances, and to make changes, and to recognize that, when something doesn't go the way you wanted it to, that's a failure to some degree, but it's also an opportunity to learn. And it's
Right.
also an opportunity not just to learn about yourself,
Right.
but to learn about what next step might be possible for you.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a mini selfish question to ask you. You are a very important person. You do many things. You wear many different hats. Your time is limited, and yet you agreed to share your time today with us. Why did you choose to come onto the Golden Sheep podcast?
Life is hard, right? And I mean, I'm an educator. I spend a lot of time working with people from the ages of their late teens through the lifespan of people who are trying to reorient their careers, and think about the impact that they want to make in their lives. And to me, opportunities to figure out how to reach people and give them a message that they might need at the time that they need it is really important.
Right.
I think one of the things that we all forget is that human beings come prepackaged with very little knowledge. We don't actually know much. We have to learn everything that's going to help us to navigate the world.
Right.
And if nobody teaches us things, how are we supposed to do that? And so for me to have opportunities to do things like come on this podcast and talk to people who are really thinking through that career path, thinking through that life path that they want to take, if there's anything that I can say that will turn out to be helpful from my experience, then I feel like I've done something for other people that plenty of people did for me over the years. I mean, I certainly had lots of people who served as role models. I had lots of people who gave me advice at the times that I needed it. I wasn't lucky enough to grow up in an era where there were podcasts that would do this. So,
Yes.
I had 3 or 4 TV channels I could choose from. But I think the fact that we have all of these outlets now is important, and it's important that people who have gone through these things participate in that.
Absolutely. We really do appreciate your wisdom and just evidence that things will be okay, essentially. So now it's time for question from the people. So I have a humble little Instagram of about 400 something followers. And of those 400 people, 61 to 65 people, can't remember, submitted a question. So I had to really pick. So sorry if I left you guys out. But Lauren from Austin, Texas wants to know, who's the ideal student for UT Austin?
Thanks, Lauren. I think actually this idea of openness is a real piece of what makes somebody an ideal student at the University of Texas. At any of the levels where we offer our education, whether it's people who want to be an undergraduate there, people who want to come back and go to a more traditional graduate program, or even people who are looking for a professional program, it's that willingness to learn something you didn't think you needed to know. I mean, one of the things I talk about a lot is that if you look at the great innovators of the world, they are people who know a lot about a lot. And often when they learned whatever piece of information or pieces of information that were key to the breakthroughs that they made, when they learned that information, they didn't know they needed it.
Yeah.
They only discovered later that information was going to turn out to be valuable. And so I think that the great students are the ones who just soak up all the wonderful information that's there without really worrying about exactly how they're going to use it later.
Right.
And then, just like you can't edit your life story in the forward direction, you shouldn't edit the information you take in the forward direction either by saying, well, this is irrelevant to me. I don't, you'll only know it's irrelevant at the end of your life.
Right.
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 And along the way, you're going to discover that lots of things that you thought were completely irrelevant turned out to be incredibly important.
Essentially, it's building an archive of when to pull information. And sometimes, as life has it, it's at the most random moments as well.
Exactly right.
Second question, Camila from Mexico City, Mexico, wants to know, what was your favorite subject in school and why?
Wow, Camila, great question. At different times in my life, those were different answers.
Wow. Okay.
So I mean, I think growing up, I was pretty good at math, so I enjoyed my math classes. Early on, actually, in college, I loved my computer science classes. I didn't want to be a computer scientist because I couldn't imagine spending all day, every day, dealing with computers. But those, that first couple of years of courses that you take in order to be part of a computer science program, I loved that. I loved the problem solving that was associated with that. And then, one of my favorite classes in college actually was a math class that was but it was one of my favorite classes, not because of the subject, but because the instructor was incredible. He built all these computer programs to help teach the material and created a learning experience that was just amazing. And then, I would say later as I began to realize that I was going to be a psychologist, largely because I thought artificial intelligence was amazing, but in the 1980s when I was a college student, computers were slow and stupid, and so there just wasn't the computing power or the access to data that you would need to do the kinds of things that we see computers doing now. In that era, then I really fell in love with everything having to do with the way minds work, and it was just my last couple of years of college, my first few years of graduate school were really, there was a certain amount of stress because of the uncertainty about what's going to happen, but I really just loved digging into all that material.
Right. Very cool. It sounds like you're an expert learner.
I enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's just fun. You mentioned earlier that I play the saxophone, and I do encourage people throughout their lives every once in a while to take up a new thing that you're really bad at. Because for several reasons. One, because it's an opportunity to learn a new thing, but also, I think partly from a humility standpoint. I think when you're good at something, you begin to think I'm good at things, and you're not good at things. You may be good at things, but you're not good at everything, right?
Right.
There's going to be a certain amount of stuff you're actually really bad at, and I think it's important every once in a while to take up something new and realize just how terrible you are at most things.
Right. Building the skill.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so that willingness to just, when I took up the saxophone, on my very first day, I got the sax from my saxophone teacher, and I was so excited, and I played for about a half hour after that, till my lip was completely numb, and my oldest son, who was about 7 at the time, the next morning he came out of his bedroom and he was like, "Were you playing your new saxophone last night, Daddy?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I thought so. It sounded like you were moving chairs in the kitchen."
Oh my God.
And so you kind of need that reminder that just because you're good at some stuff,
right,
you can still play an instrument like you're moving chairs in the kitchen for a while, and that eventually, right, if you stick with it, you'll master that as well, and there's nothing to be embarrassed about, to not know things. Right. It's the only thing to be embarrassed about is the unwillingness to learn them.
Right. And that's the serendipity of life, is continuously learning, absorbing information, and doing something with what you already know.
Right.
So final question, the golden sheep question. What is your golden sheep advice to all of us listening in?
Oh, like I say, don't, just be open to stuff. Don't edit. Let life come to you. And try not to stress over it too much. I think one of the things that now that I'm older
right,
and can look back a little bit, I've realized that most of the things in my life that I stressed over, in retrospect, are not the things I needed to be worried about. And so just allowing things to happen, recognizing that in some ways you will tell a story about how things worked out, and it will have worked out whatever your story is. It won't have worked out the way you expected it to. So I think just allowing, allow life to come at you and try to enjoy it while it's happening.
You said life is similar to the Grand Canyon. Could you
Yes.
share that analogy with us?
Sure. So, there was a long period of time where I would go through life thinking, gosh, if only the next thing would happen, then I would, then I'll be happy, right?
So relatable.
So, like as an undergraduate, if I could just get into graduate school, then I'll be happy. Then I got into graduate school. Well, if I just finish my first year project, or if I just get finish my comprehensive exams, or if I could just get a postdoc, if I could just get a job, right? It was always that next thing was going to be the thing that made me happy. And at some point it reminded me of something. When I was 15 years old, I went to the Grand Canyon, and we hiked down pretty far, and then at the end of like late in the day, we started hiking back up. And when you hike in the Grand Canyon, it's all these switchbacks. There's a path, and then it turns, and at some point as you're climbing up, you're thinking, surely we must almost be there by now. And so you trudge up this pathway, and you turn the corner, and then there'd be another pathway. And you'd be like, oh, another pathway. And I realized at some point, you have to realize you're trudging those pathways. You're in the Grand Canyon. Like, turn to the side for a second and look. You are standing inside one of the marvels of nature. Why are you so worried about getting to the top?
Yeah.
And I think that similarly, I feel like a lot of those landmarks where you say, if I could just get that next thing and then I'll be happy, that's your switchback.
Right.
And if you just recognize you're in the Grand Canyon,
right,
that you're in this remarkable life that you've got, and that in that don't assume that it is an end point that's going to be the thing that makes you happy. At some point, you got to realize walking along that path in the Grand Canyon,
right,
that's actually the amazing thing.
I can't think of a better way to wrap up this episode. Thank you so much, Dr. Markman, for your time. That's a wrap, Golden Sheet.